Side.
So, you're on the other side, eh? Well, what are you doing over here?
Well, the food is better over here.
The 1930s and the 1990s American comedy films in this essay will be analyzed by using Rick Altman's theory of semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic approach and Richard Dyer's utopian theory. Richard Dyer's utopian theory represents a form of entertainment and escapist fantasy in the era of depression for middle-class Americans. This was in response to the specific inadequacies of the society. The prominence of the 1930s decade was that it was known as the golden age of sound comedy, turbulence, and order. In the 1930s, filmmakers produced movies that analyzed class conflict and gender politics. American movies during the Great Depression were visually appealing as a form of escapist entertainment. American movies during the Great Depression were significant in promoting American culture and reinforces the status quo by normalizing hegemony and regulating societal politics through democracy. Our research question is concerned with class conflicts and gender politics represented in the 1930s and 90s Hollywood comedy films. Animal Crackers and Duck Soup, two of the most famous movies by the Marx Brothers, will be analyzed. Both these Marx Brother movies share similar semantic elements. In the movie Duck Soup, Groucho's character as Firefly is seen as a physically and romantically inadequate character, as he is mocking himself throughout the movie, demonstrating that he is not fit to rule a country. In Duck Soup, the central figure Mrs. Teasdale is given power over the country's politics solely due to her wealth. The protagonists are romantically interested in Mrs. Teasdale solely due to her wealth and with the hidden agenda of acquiring her fortune. Mrs. Teasdale is an ideal example of the influence of political corruption in the real world. Chaplin's antipathy for the cold cruelty of social welfare institutions and the bureaucrats who own them is inherent in City Lights. As seen, Chaplin plays the role of a homeless person and is seen sleeping on a newly built statue that is about to be inaugurated by the rich and elite citizens of upper class society. And Chaplin gets mocked by these people for sleeping on the statue and for being homeless. Comedy is concerned with everyday life. It represents the life of lower and middle class individuals with extensive powers as well as their behaviors, whether trivial or vulgar. For example, in modern times, Chaplin is mistakenly arrested on the basis of him leading a communist protest.
Goodbye, my love!
Dumb and Dumber is the opposite of coming of age. According to this backwards logic, if a white middle-class heterosexual American male cannot achieve success in America, it must be because he lacks intellectual and emotional maturity. This is the underlying point of the film. If dumbness is a large part of our problem, analyzing idiocracy in the film could make us all a little bit smarter. If we consider that these characters' only realization is that they are nobodies, this represents a happy ending for the audience. This film draws humor from the superiority that its audience is allowed to feel relative to these characters due to the emotional distance that comedy allows. There was a great deal of anxiety about the white male American dream and about the fluidity of masculinity, making these comedies popular particularly with young male audiences in the 1990s. And these were represented in these comedies, including There Is Something About Mary. The scenes in this film contain liberal doses of retard humor and lampooning of gay sex and serial murder. Laughs are elicited at the expense of race, sexuality, and economic status. The protagonist in There's Something About Mary is infantilized and exhibited for public ridicule because of his inability to achieve the American dream.
5 hours, right? Not necessary.
Films like Bean and Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me are both highly representative of comedy films in the 90s decade in Hollywood. Mr. Bean's larger-than-life character illustrates the class relations of the 90s where the middle class mocks the upper class. He demeans them by mocking the dining etiquette of people from high-class societies by serving them onions as appetizers. The common theme is that both these film features white middle-class men who need to accept some form of adult responsibility in order to achieve their dramatic goals. In The Spy Who Shagged Me, it dehumanizes women throughout the film by using women as assassin robots and their body parts as weapons and therefore degrading them. The socio-cultural significance of slapstick comedy is that the subversive nature in satire can be utilized for influencing social renewal and change through self-reflexivity. Consider that without film comedy, Americans would stand to lose a critical arena of public discourse as well as the cultural artifacts that allow future generations to better understand their history. After the Great Depression, class consciousness was on the rise and characterized in the 30s comedies. Slapstick in silent comedy films of the 30s are most concerned with class relations where lower class societies are being mocked by the elite, whereas slapstick in comedy films of the postmodern era, the 1970s to the 1990s, analyze social cultural distinctions of gender and sexual politics. Although the violence in slapstick is humorous, it reminds spectators of the violence of life and war on Earth. The rise of slapstick comedies in the postmodern era of the 70s to the 90s is due to violent humor which reflects the social and political upheaval of America during that era. Film comedy is also one of the primary methods through which the American dream has been renegotiated from one generation to next throughout the past 70 years.